So I've been thinking about what I wanted to talk about today. I have some ideas. With these videos, I don't want to go too far off the rails. I would like to just pick like a generic topic and focus on that. But at the same time, I don't want to be constrained with rules because it seems like a lot of people kind of, I don't want to say reacted, but it's more, they were positive. The feedback was positive. Let's put it that way. So again, I'm not gonna do that to anybody. I'm gonna try and I think as long as I keep it to about an hour and stick to just a topic, it could be anything within that topic, right? And I can deviate a little bit, but as long as I come back to that topic, I think that'll be fine. So there's a lot I want to say. So I think today's topic will be about connective tissue. What do I mean by connective tissue? Well, connective tissue in the sense that I'm thinking of is okay. Let me kind of parse out a scenario here. On YouTube, a lot of people talk about topics and they use an article or something to talk about those topics. I personally, when I do a topic, I find an article that interests me. I don't like reading too much into the article. I want to be surprised live. Excuse me. But I look for interesting articles. This week we did two articles. One was the AT&T CEO situation, and then the other was this Deschutes County Sheriff's officer, or the sheriff, the actual sheriff of Deschutes County was put on the Brady list, and that ended up destroying his career. Those topics fascinated me. One is because not a lot of people know about the Brady list. And I strongly encourage anybody who doesn't know about the Brady list to look up the Brady list. And in fact, let me look it up real fast for you. I'll find the exact case here. It's Brady v. Maryland, and it happened in 1963. It's a very interesting case, but basically the dude, it was a murder case, and it was found that the district attorney withheld some evidence that would have helped his case. And because of that, we got what's called the Brady list. It's called the Brady list on the West Coast. I think on the East Coast it's called something else, but it's essentially the same thing. And it's just a list of district attorneys have where they feel that they put law enforcement personnel on there who they feel are just should not be on the stand. They're dishonest in some way. So like I said, it was mostly awareness, and a lot of the stuff that I bring to you is stuff that I feel you should be aware of because I don't see it talked about a lot. Like I see a lot of people out there, they talk about women and jobs and all that stuff. And it drives me nuts because I see a lot of the same themes and stuff, but no one makes those connections. And that's kind of what the topic here is there's no connective tissue. So how do I start this? Well, let me start with a very controversial statement. I think we're screwed. Like, I hate to say that, but I really think we're on the verge of something major. And this started with the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which we talked about in the most recent video, which was the AT&T guy. I'm just coming off of two videos. But this one's going to be the first video because this is Musing Mondays. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do my other videos, and then I'm going to record this so that way I'm kind of fresh and I got ideas and stuff like that. Anyways, so the Fourth Industrial Revolution, I'm going to look this up as well real fast. But the Fourth Industrial Revolution is it's also known as Industry 4.0. Uh, it follows the third industrial revolution, and the term was popularized in 2016 by Klaus Schwab, which, as you know, Klaus Schwab is an evil prick. He's the founder of the World Economic Forum, and he's now under investigation for embezzling a ton of money from them. But even some of the most evil pricks in the world have interesting ideas. And that's what this is. So a part of this phase of industrial change is the joining of technologies like artificial intelligence, gene editing, to advanced robotics that blur the lines between physical, digital, and biological worlds. That's the difference here. Whereas the third industrial revolution was basically what we call the information age, just as context here. So the reason why I'm bringing up the fourth industrial revolution is I believe the problem is I don't want to sit there and say that there's too many people. I don't believe for a second that there's too many people. The issue is there's not enough labor or structured labor. There's always labor, but not enough structured labor for people to perform. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm of the belief and opinion in my heart of hearts, hand to God, that everybody has a place in society. Okay? Everyone should have purpose. The reason why we have a lot of societal ails right now is because there's not a lot of purpose in life. And purpose means, at least for me, now everyone's definition is different. Fine, great, okay. But for me, purpose is what gets you up in the morning. What's your drive? You know, we're constantly talking about, forgive the term, but NEETs, not in employment, education, or training. They don't have a reason to get up. You know, they're constantly getting up. They go get high. They play video games all day, and then they go to bed and they do the same thing over and over and over again. And then they wake up in their 30s and they're like, okay, what the heck happened? Purpose has to come from within. Okay. But the problem is we're constantly told, well, we're constantly fed. Let's do that. From birth, that our sole mission in life is to get a job. And I think a lot of that came from, the boomers. And I don't have hate for boomers. That's just what they were told too. We are a product of the generation raising us. Okay. For my generation, the millennials, we were raised by boomers. The boomers that were raised by the greatest generation, okay, and so on and so forth. They have values that they internalized, but it's not just from their parents. The boomers also were brought up during the whole summer love thing and all that stuff. They rebelled. Such is life. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is I don't blame boomers for a lot of things. I do blame them for allowing these things to happen. But I also blame Gen X and my generation for these things happening as well. It just seems like we're all passengers in our current predicament. And nobody wants to take responsibility. And in a way, why should you take responsibility for something that you may not have had any hand in? Like, I personally did not have a hand in AI. So it's kind of like this thing where we're all looking for a scapegoat, someone to blame. But at the end of the day, the only people that should be blamed are ourselves. So back to what I was saying about the fourth industrial revolution. The problem is capitalism, and I don't mean to rail against capitalism. I think capitalism in a way is very good. Capitalism is what brought us the technological advancements that we have today. Things like medicine, modern medicine, let me put it that way, cell phones, ways to communicate, ways to travel through planes, ships. I'm able to go to the grocery store, buy a pineapple on the cheap any time of the year because of capitalism. Is that right? Is that fair? I don't know. My father likes to think that we should not be allowed to buy pineapples year round. I don't know. Maybe that's a sign of progress. Maybe that's a sign that we're screwed. I don't know. I just think that that's pretty neat. I'm able to experience things that generations before me were never able to even conceive. There was a time in human history where they didn't know what a pineapple was. They didn't know what a banana was. They didn't know that being on a ship without eating citrus would cause them to bleed and not be able to heal. There was a time where you got a little cut and you ended up passing because of it. That's all I'm saying is there's pros and cons. I do long for a time where men were men and women were women. A lot of my thumbnails are AI generated images of men being men, thinkers and warriors, but we don't have that anymore. We live in a time where we're very comfortable and safe, for better or worse. And I'm not saying that we should go fight and, start wars and stuff like that. I'm not saying that, because war is horrifying. You go onto r/war and you see the videos that come out of places like Syria and Ukraine, and I don't like seeing those videos. Because I can only imagine how bad it is to be there. But we play video games all day long about those kinds of things. And in a way, even though we play video games about it, it's still very sterile. You see a little splash of blood, but that's about it. You don't see the person holding their intestines in, and the women who are laying on the street, obviously passed, and their pants are around their ankles. We all know what happened there. One of the earlier videos from Ukraine was this Russian soldier. He was laying there deceased, and there were two corpses with him. One was a little girl, and one was an older woman. Not older as in but I would imagine a mother and a daughter, and both their pants were removed. So I'm just saying that there's some very horrifying things out there, and we are very privileged, for lack of a better term, privileged to not have to experience that on a daily basis. But again, back to my reckoning, I feel that the people who are in charge by self-appointment probably feel that there's too many people. It's only logical. China recently was discovered to have misled a lot of people about their population. Which, let's be honest here. Is anyone surprised at that? I'm not. But they still have a glut of males. A huge glut of males, and no wives for them. Well, what's the logical thing that has to happen? Because if you got a group of boys who have no prospects, what do you think's going to happen there? They're a threat. A threat to stability, because an angry male population is going to lash out and destroy, if not overthrow. That's the issue that's happening worldwide, is a lot of these males are very angry. Make no mistake, they're very angry. I always say that it's the hidden army. A bunch of boys who are bored and are angry can only lead to one logical conclusion. I'm not going to say what the logical conclusion is for censorship sake, but we all can imagine what's going to happen. And I think that the people who rule over us, who were not elected, who were not chosen, except for themselves, they are making the same mathematical equations that I am. You know, why would you pay someone to exist? Why? It makes no logical sense, especially if we live in a finite world, which when it comes to money, money is the only thing that's infinite because it's fiat. You know, if money was backed by something, then it would also become finite. And in fact, I've never understood the whole push to take as much money as possible, because what does money do? It just sits there. You know, Pablo Escobar was famous for having money in these little hidey holes, and he lost 10% to rot every single year. One of the wealthiest men in the world. And he had storage places all around Colombia. And he lost 10% because it rotted. That's what greed does. Greed lets you sit on that money doing nothing with it. And yeah, he spent it lavishly, but like, he was what, the 8th wealthiest person in the world at one point? And he burned money to stay warm. You know, like, I understand he was worried about the government coming in and seizing it, but like, he even had a mind too small to understand what he really had. Because all money is it's a transitory item. Money itself is not worth anything. Money allows you to purchase something that has value. When you really break it down, you know, I mean, back in the day, even when money was backed by like gold or silver, you could at least buy gold and silver with it. I mean, you can still do that, but like, what I'm saying is you could go redeem it with the government to go buy the gold and silver. You can't do that anymore. You have to go to like one of these national mints or whatever and go buy gold and silver from them. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that money itself is intrinsically not worth the fabric that it's printed on or the coin that it's minted on. You know, in fact, the penny right now, it's famous for being worth less than it takes to manufacture one. You know, the difference between a penny's worth of 1 cent versus, what is it, 3.4 cents now to make a penny? You know, we're talking about getting rid of it, which I don't think that that's going to happen. I think they'll stop minting it for a while. A new president will come in and get rid of all Trump's executive orders, and we'll have the penny again. You know, but my point is that's what greed does, and that's what these overlords are doing right now. Is like, you know, the whole thing about them buying houses for what? To rent? I mean, from my understanding, everyone's saying, well, a lot of these homes that they're buying are sitting empty. Well, what happens to a home when it sits empty? When it's not taken care of? It rots. It falls apart. You know? It's going to cost them more money to, you know, rebuild that house into its former glory, you know, and they spent all that money buying up all these properties. They're just sitting there rotting away. It's wasteful. It's sad in a way. I don't blame anybody for wanting to sell out to the highest bidder. I don't. You know, if I were in the same shoes, I mean, I would. It only makes sense because that means I can go spend a little bit more on something I want or something I need. I'm thirsty. But my point in all this is, what is this getting us? You know, we're facing a point of no return. And in a way, we're always facing that. You can never go back. Progress will continue. But what do you do? Like I said, I have a few ideas of what's going to happen, And I'm sure a lot of you have already done the mathematical equations that I've done, and we're all coming up with the same answer, which is it's not pretty. So why are we doing this to ourselves? This is what I'm talking about, us being passengers in this ride we call life. You know, we have no agency because we get up, we go to work, we come back home, we go to sleep. Like, as the Joker would say, did your balls drop off? I kid because I'm just as guilty of it, but I do recognize this. I recognize that it's a problem. Okay. And a lot of people don't recognize it. And that's why I'm talking about connective tissue is, again, we can talk about these topics all day long, but until we put everything together and mesh it together, they're all islands of events, you know? And I guess what it boils down to is that drives me nuts. And I'm just as guilty. I admit that. And I'm trying my hardest to connect stories together to kind of paint a mosaic towards this, you guys, my audience. Because that mosaic, I think, is very important for us to understand. You know, we all see that something's on the horizon, but no one can really put it all together. And I know a lot of people are going to sit there and say, oh, Jack's just a crazy conspiracy theorist, whatever. Okay, then I'm the crazy conspiracy theorist. Fine. Everyone, like Alex Jones is famous for being the guy that's on the rooftop screaming about it. But again, what it boils down to is we're all aware. What do we do? Well, I came up with my famous video, you can't vote your way out of it. So voting's out of it. What's the next step? I don't know. I don't know. And the problem is a lot of people are in the same boat as me. We all don't know. What do we do? I myself, like I said, I'm trying to reduce my life down as much as I can. Because when the chips fall where they lie, I don't want to be here when they do fall. Because I can already see how ugly it's going to be. You know, the problem is everyone's trying to control. I don't think you can control human nature, no matter how hard you try. And history has shown you can't. You know, 1984 was very famous about the amount of control that Big Brother and Ingsoc had over people. You know, so far, you know, they had control to the point where they were even railing against the orgasm and sexual pleasure. To the point where Winston having relations with that one girl was an act of rebellion. Think about that. And in every book that talks about control, like Brave New World is a famous example of this. You know, they use medication to control. You know, but they allow free use of sex to kind of quell the masses. You know, they didn't have like a concept of marriage. They had, you know, you would go and you would have relations with whoever, and then you would take a pill to, you know, if you were hormonal as a woman, you would take a pill to imitate pregnancy. Like, that's how much control they had. They had control over hormones, over the human body through pharmaceuticals. You know, I honestly believe that we're entering a world that's a combination of Atlas Shrugged, 1984, and Brave New World. Because I read an article the other day that stated that 60% of Americans was on some form of medication. 60% on continuous medication. And I know what it mostly is. Most young people, specifically women, are reporting mental health issues. Well, how do you treat mental health issues? Medication. See, that's the connective tissue right there that I'm talking about. We don't talk about that connective tissue. We talk about stats all day long, but we never link to how it is. I firmly believe that the suppression of hormones, and I'm not saying that this is 100% of the time, but most of the time, women are subjected to birth control because it's easier to control a woman's reproductive cycle than it is a man's. I know that they're talking about the birth control shot for men. It's in trials right now. I think it's going to be coming out soon. But like I said, most birth control is hormonal control over women. The problem is that has extreme unintended consequences, and I think that that's where a lot of the problems are coming from, is that one singular medication. When you mess with hormones, you have an extreme plethora of unintended consequences. Some of which are good. I know that there are some women out there that have cycles that are so painful and irregular that they have to take those medications to have a sense of normalcy and basically they're not in pain, so I'm not saying that it's evil and all that stuff, but where I'm trying to get at is we're so quick to prescribe, and this has been a known issue since the 90s, where the rise of ADD and ADHD, the quick fix was medication, and a lot of people were sitting there saying, well, why are we so quick to prescribe these medicines? Again, I think it's I don't want to sit there and say it's control. I don't think Dr. Tobias down the street is doing it to control your kids. He's making money off of prescribing it through kickbacks. I do believe that there's a lot of doctors who want to help, and if they make a little bit of money on the side because of it, fine. But there are some that they'll just sit there and push pills all day long. And then, of course, there's a lot of kids out there that want those meds because they get high off of it. So it's a combination of things. I got one friend who is constantly on seeking Adderall because it helps. He says it makes him focus and all that stuff, which, if you got to have a drug to focus, then there's other problems. Let's talk about those problems. But like I said, I think that there's a lot of stuff that we talk about, but we don't connect to. And I think it's what it boils down to is there's too much to connect. I just gave you a small sliver of problems. And I know I'm probably going to get this video banned because of what I just said, but I needed to say it. The question that I have for everybody, and you don't have to answer me, just think about it. Why is it that we don't make those connections? Why? Is it because nobody thinks about it? Is it because we talk about something and then immediately forget it? Why? Why is that? And I'm not talking about you and me. I know that, you're part of my audience, and I force you, I challenge you to think about those things. But most channels that do the quote unquote react, why don't they? Why don't they ask you those questions? Why don't they challenge you to think about those things? All day long in my job, I listen to these. I don't want to say hucksters and charlatans. There are some that are hucksters and charlatans, and then there are some that I think they're well-meaning, but they just don't have the imagination to think about these things. And I think that's really what it boils down to is we don't have imagination. I don't want to sit there and say I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm not. Nowhere close. There are many people smarter than I. But I have imagination, and I notice that the smarter a person is, the less imagination they have. And it's not like I'm not saying that to be a jerk. Chinese students have talked about how the further they go in their education, the less imagination they have. And I think that that's kind of the whole point of formal education, is to force you to think within a box. Henry Ford, was it Henry Ford or was it Carnegie? One of the two famously stated that the whole point of American education was to create more workers, which I believe. The problem is our education system is so archaic at this point because it's slow to change things. When I went to school, my history books, or my geography books, I should say, my geography books still have the USSR. And I went to school, I graduated in 2008. The Soviet Union fell in 91, I think. Yeah, 91. Go figure. We've seen videos of, let me put it this way. This is, and I already know what I'm going to say is not 100% the truth. But I'm going to say this as to illustrate my point. I'm going to give you the full truth as to why, but I'm going to tell you what it is. The highest paid public employee in your state, most likely, is a university sports coach. Let me say that again. The highest paid public employee is a university sports coach in your state. There's only 3 that are exceptions to that. The reason why I'm saying that is because one is if they work at a university, they're considered a public employee. Okay? That's one. 2 is the other reason why I'm saying that is because I want to illustrate a point, which is I already know that universities, they make the most money out of everything they do from 2 sources. One is foreign exchange students, because when you get a foreign exchange student, right, they pay 4 times as much as an in-state student in some cases. Like at my university, my tuition was like $250 a credit, something like that. They pay almost $1,000 per credit. And when I mean foreign exchange, I mean they actually came from a foreign country. My university was big on Chinese, Indian, and Middle Eastern students. And every single student that came from there came from a well-off family. Or they were involved in some government program. Like this one kid, he was going to my university for engineering. The government was paying for him to go there, and he made a lot of money just to go to my school. Like he was getting paid a full-on paycheck, and they covered his room and board and his tuition and every other fee that he would have gotten. It's cheaper for most of these countries to pay their students to come here to get educated, get a better education, than it is for them to open up a university there and hire the educators and all that stuff. They still do, but it's like a discount version of it. And the university makes a ton of money. So that's the one source. The second source is from sports programs, specifically football. Because, I mean, again, I guarantee you that the biggest stadium for your university is the football stadium. I guarantee it. All right. I guarantee that stadium has a merchandise store in there, and the prices are probably outrageous because they make a ton of money from that and all the licensing that comes from it. They make a ton of money off of that too. If you've seen videos, there was this one famous, what was that? TikTok, I think, that just came out recently, where they showed, I can't remember what university it was. I remember that the color was purple because like you saw this the football team's locker room, and it was purple. It was like disgustingly purple. You show that, and then they, to juxtapose the whole point, they showed the video of the library on campus, and it was the roof of the library was, or not the roof, but the drop ceiling of the library was caving in and soaked and wet and all that stuff. That's where the priority is the thing that makes money. The library doesn't make money. It's unfortunate, but that's the honest to God truth. It doesn't make money. It's a cost. You know, I work in IT. IT is always seen as a cost. It's never seen as a benefit, even though the IT team is the one thing that's allowing the company to make money. And that's my whole point in all of this. Again, connective tissue. I think, back to the university story, I think it was University of Michigan, I think. Missouri, Michigan, something like that. It started with an M. The logo was a big M. So if someone can find it, please link it to me. But anyways, back to what I was saying. I think that the fourth industrial revolution is going to transition us into a point where they're going to ask, why do we have all these people around? Why? All they are useless eaters. That's it. You know, rather than spend the resources to train them and do something productive with their life, they're just going to say, let's let them starve and be done with it. You know, because I mean, we're constantly talking, especially now lately, about universal basic income. What do you think is going to happen when people have a UBI? All the prices are going to reflect that. You know, when my grandfather, he was going into the home for dementia, they had his Social Security payments down to a science. The home was going to take the whole thing, give him $200 a month as like a little allowance, and everything was going to be covered from that money. You don't think for 1 second that when UBI comes in, they're going to have a system down like that where you may get a UBI, but you got like a basic house, you get like food ration to you, all that stuff, and it's going to come from that UBI. It's going to be some kind of government program. They're going to be like, you know, you get your UBI. So why do we need a UBI then? Why not just give us a box of food every freaking month? Be done with it. Like a UBI is basically rationing with extra steps. That's all it is. You know, but that's what I'm talking about. Is that freedom? Is that living? No, it's not. It's not freedom, my friends. It's not. It's what that is it's just daycare. We've seen the videos of the girls doing the dances saying, Gen Z boss in the mini, Gen Z boss in the mini. That's adult daycare. They get paid a ton of money to do nothing. And the reason why they're there is so that way that company can do a little checkbox. Say, yes, we got a woman in that position. Yes, we got a minority in that position. Yes, we got an LGBTQ person in that position. So that way, when they go to get loans and money and all that stuff, they can say, yes, we have these check boxes here ready to go. But they don't serve a purpose. And I guarantee you, my friends, that when push comes to shove, those are always, in fact, I've seen it. I've seen the follow-up videos on TikTok from some of those people, and they get laid off. They spend all that money and they get laid off, you know, but they can find a job easy because they tick that little checkbox. I don't tick a checkbox. I don't. In fact, the one checkbox I do tick is the one that they don't want. Just look at my skin complexion. Come on. Let's be realistic here. I'm not trying to scare anybody here, but what I'm saying is we got to start thinking about the connective tissue. We got to start connecting these stories because the connections are just as important as the stories themselves. You know, you're going to see a video on the Deschutes County Sheriff being put on the Brady list. Well, how does that story affect you? Well, it's important to know if your county has a Brady list. So that way, when you do have to go to front of court, which I hope to God that never happens, but if you do, and it's criminal, well, now you know, hey, is the officer who's involved in my case, is he on the Brady list? That changes the whole equation because a lot of people know that stuff. But the fact that there's a case involved and the fact that that list exists shows that they know. They're not stupid. No. I always, it bothers me when people sit there and say that government employees are some of the stupidest people you ever meet in your life. No. They know the game. They know. Come on. They know what that game is. They play that game day in and day out. You're telling me that they don't know? No, they know. In fact, I guarantee you that government employees are probably the smartest people in the world because they know they got a job, a cushy job, mind you, a cushy job with benefits that are better than yours, and they will never be fired. And by the time they retire, they'll get a great retirement package, all paid for by you, the taxpayer. You know, it's like the whole story about the gym teacher. And he's like, why am I smarter than the science teacher? And the kids are like, I don't know. Why are you? Because I get paid the same amount as he does, and I get to play dodgeball all day. So come on. You're telling me that the person at the DMV is an idiot? No. They know. They're smart. No, you and I, my friends, we're trying to do the right thing. We're the stupid ones. Because we're trying to do the right thing. And for what? Why are we trying to do the right thing? Pride? I will answer that for myself. I do the right thing because at the end of the day, I have to sleep at night. You know? But if I had no shame, I wouldn't be doing the right thing. Come on. You know? But I guess that's what separates me from some of these other people. And that's the problem, is I have a conscience. I want to be able to live with myself. That's what makes me a liability to those above us. The whole point of Sentinel Circle was to bring men together. We may not agree on everything. That's fine. You know, I don't expect to agree. In fact, I've run into many people that I disagree with on many different things. But the one facet that I'm constantly seeing day in and day out is everyone is in agreement, at least the people that I've talked to, that something's not quite right. And I'm not saying that to be conspiratorial, to be mysterious or whatever adjectives you want to throw in there. No. I'm saying that as a statement of fact. Okay, I don't BS anybody here. Statements of fact only. I'm trying to be as upfront and as open and transparent as I can to you guys. Because honestly, we live in a world where too many people are lying to us day in and day out. I think we all need a little bit of authenticity. But that's just me. A lot of people have come up to me and they said that, you know, I mean, I know people like Brandon Trueblood. They don't fit into what I'm about ready to say. They don't fit in that box. Brandon has his own thing. I'm not judging him. He's a good guy. He wants to do whatever he wants. That's his right as a man. And I would like to do another musing video on that too. But the issue that I have with that is I think that that's what everybody wants, is for us to isolate and close ourselves off. That's the problem with like a low trust society, is if you don't trust anybody in your society, then you guys can't get together and you guys can't organize, and they win. You know, they win through attrition. They win through the fact that you won't organize with your neighbors and your friends and all that stuff. You know, we don't have third spaces anymore because if you go into a third space, they'll call the cops on you for loitering. We don't have third spaces anymore because nobody else is there. You know, we don't have third spaces anymore because everything's too expensive. It's expensive to leave the house now. We don't have that disposable income. The question is it by accident or by design? And I think it's a combination of both. I think that it was somewhat by design, but not by the people that implemented it. I do think that there are schemers amongst us who plan and plot and scheme and try to control our lives through subtle suggestions. You know, simply because our society is not built for overt control. You know, look at the ID stuff that's happening right now. In the context of, you know, someone pushing it, yeah, I believe that. I believe there's someone pushing it. I do believe that there is a company specifically that is trying to control and want us to give IDs because, again, they make money off of our information. I don't think that it's a means to control. I think it's more a means for money. That's where I differ from everyone else. A lot of these companies that have, in fact, the T-App was one of them recently, where they had a data breach and now all these people have been exposed. I think that these are intentional. I really do think that they're intentional. And again, the reason for that is to create a problem and then introduce a solution that's been thought of 10 years ago. In this case, you know, a company, I'm not going to say which, we all know which, is going to come out and say, okay, well, buy our service where we take everyone's ID and then we tell you, hey, this person is 18 or 21 or whatever. I never thought I'd see the day, but I guess I was mistaken, where the internet is just an extension of us. And quite frankly, if I'm ever ID'd, at least on YouTube, I'm shutting down my YouTube. I'll transition over to Rumble. And that's where I'll be. You'll find me there. I would encourage everyone here to have a Rumble account just as a backup. You know, and be ready for that eventual transition if and when it does happen. If and or when, let me put it that way, because it still may not. You know, but the fact that they're suggesting it, the fact that there's articles on it, the fact that it's being alleged to happen is horrifying, and I feel bad for the citizens of the UK. There's a world full of problems. I really wish we could solve them. And that's why I think a group scenario is the solution. A community, whatever you want to call it. I really think that that's the solution. To rather than have an individual, you have a business entity, and then you live under this business entity. And I'm saying business as in paperwork, you know. Like, I know this is not a good example, but David Koresh's community operated as a business, but it was a community. A lot of these other like farming communities and stuff, they operate as a business, and then they just have people live there and work under that business, at least on paper. So I there's precedent for what I'm advocating for, but I don't see people take it to the next step. I don't know what I mean by the next step, but there's a next step there. You know, there's a whole canyon between a little community and a nation state. You know, and I think that we can fit somewhere within that giant canyon. You know, but again, maybe that makes me nuts, crazy, whatever, and I don't know. You know, I will say, just keep your minds open. Keep your minds open. That's the one thing I've always advocated for is, you know, don't sit there and say a person's crazy, because you are better than that. Don't do that. Don't shut off information because you think someone's crazy. They could be the smartest guy in the world. I mean, freaking Nikola Tesla, a man that we all associate with genius. At his time, he was the crazy one. He was the insane one. You know, Edison did a whole smear campaign to make him look like the angry, evil scientist that people have attributed to him. But no, he was a genius, a visionary. You know, the difference between... I don't mean to invoke James Bond, but the difference between genius and insanity is measured by one's success. That's the difference, is success. You know, if I found this community and it was successful and, you know, people were flocking to it, a lot of people wouldn't think I'm crazy. You know, but right now I'm just some guy in his second floor apartment, even though, I'm saying basement, but second floor apartment, screaming at his computer camera. I know, it just, I have enough of an open mind to understand the irony of the situation. So anyways, I'm going to call it. We're 52 minutes into this. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And again, the topic was connective tissue. Just learning how to connect these individual stories together. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know a lot of people have praised videos like this. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. And you have a great day, okay?